My last video was showing how to implement FSR4, at least an int8 version of it that AMD accidentally leaked on RDNA 3 GPUs. That's AMD's 7000 series. Remember, only AMD's 9000 series, RDNA 4, officially supports FSR4. However, what I'm testing out right here is trying to use the same process to run FSR4 on an RX 6800 XT. My last video was the 7800 XT. And using the exact same process, you could refer to that video, installing Optiscaler, getting the right DLL, unfortunately doesn't work if you're on the current up-to-date driver. You can see that things clearly look wrong. We're getting weird flashes coming off of that bottle. We're getting tons of aliasing on these palm trees. Things just generally don't look right, and it ends up actually looking worse than if we were just using FSR3 that's actually built into the game. So just to show that, FSR3 is not great. We still get some kind of flickering and instability on the branches here. But look, the bottle's no longer like some kind of weird strobe, and things generally look better than what we were getting out of the FSR4 image. Now, that doesn't mean we need to give up. It means that we need to use a different driver version or modify the more up-to-date driver version. Let's start with going back to the driver that actually works properly with this, which I'll show you how to do now. The version of the AMD driver that works with this int8 FSR4 on RDNA 2 GPUs is 23.9.1. Now, I'll link to this in the video description, but you can also just Google search for that, and you will get to the AMD page that has this driver download, and that's what we're gonna wanna do. So I'm gonna click on the download link for that, wait for it to download, and then we'll install it like normal. I guess I actually will mention that when you click on the file that you downloaded to install the driver and run it, you will need to say that you are downgrading the driver, which I guess when I said you'll install it like normal, you might not be used to it saying that you're doing a downgrade. So I wanted to at least clarify that. So when we're doing this, notice it does say install a downgrade, and then continue through the process like normal. Okay, here's the moment of truth. We've downgraded our driver to one that is compatible with FSR4 on RDNA 2, and I've now restarted Cyberpunk. Now, right now, I'm still on FSR 3.1.5, and notice that we have some problems, like the palm tree branches kind of up above my head right now. You can see that they're kind of flickery, they're not super stable. Our general FSR3 problems. It doesn't look amazing. Now, when I press Insert to open up Optiscaler, again, I explained how to install Optiscaler along with the FSR4 compatible DLL in my previous video. I'll link it in the video description or pinned comment. Anyway, so now we're gonna go ahead and switch from FSR3, make sure you're that you're on that, to FSR4, 4.0.2. I'm gonna change the upscaler, and hopefully it actually works now. And it kinda looks better, right? Do you see, guys, the plant, the palm trees up above, not having as much of that kind of aliasing flickering that we were seeing before? And then when we tried this out previously on the other driver, we saw that this can was going absolutely insane with all sorts of flashing and stuff. And now we're seeing just kind of flashing when it should. I mean, there is some sunlight reflecting off of that, so at certain angles you get a bit of a flash, but not that weird strobing flickering that we were seeing before. Now, I am still seeing a little bit of sparkling that I'm not sure is quite right. I feel like some of these sparkles are maybe a bit much. I'm gonna go ahead and switch back to native resolution and see if those sparkles are still quite as sparkly. Because one thing I am interested in with all of this is, okay, this FSR4 int8 version is clearly not the same thing as the FP8 version that is running on RDNA 4, the AMD 9000 series GPUs. So how much is the image quality similar? How much is it different? And even is it the same between 6000 series and 7000 series GPUs? So we'll explore that. But first, again, I wanted to switch back to native resolution. Yeah, and I'm noticing I'm not seeing quite as big of sparkles coming off of this character's like plasticky stuff. Like you get the sun reflecting in a specific spot that makes sense. But yeah, and this can not quite as sparkly of a strobing at us, but it's certainly a lot better than what we were seeing when we were on the other driver version. So I think that's important here. Let me go ahead and switch this back over to using upscaling. So we're going to switch over to resolution scaling. And then we're going to switch over to using FSR4 here again. Okay, we got it. So we're back onto the FSR4. And yeah, so again, this shirt of some weird sparkles that aren't there at native resolution. Now again, there's some justification for some sort of sparkling, but that seems like a bit much. Definitely seems like a bit much. Now, a lot of other stuff, though, does seem to be improved image quality-wise, like the palm tree branches here. So it seems like there's potentially still some small problems, but there are a lot of things that have been improved, like this hologram on the fast travel area. You can see that there's a little bit of breakup. But I think if we switch back to FSR 3.1.5, we'll see that it has much bigger problems with things like that transparency. We'll see here it's much less stable even when I'm standing still, and then in motion it breaks up even worse. So yeah, there's definitely some advantages to using this. Now, the next thing I want to test out is what is the performance penalty. So off camera, I'm going to run a bunch of the built-in benchmark at various settings, and then we can see, okay, not only is this working, but is it gaining performance? Because if the upscale runs too slowly on RDNA 2, then it's not going to be particularly worth it. I'm also interested in seeing how the performance scales on RDNA 2 with our 6800 XT versus RDNA 3 with the 7800 XT results I got in my last video, and I'll also put together some side-by-sides for that. So I'm going to do that and edit it together, and I'll be right back with some side-by-sides. Okay, so I've ran a bunch of tests now, and we're going to see the side-by-sides of native TAA and FSR3 and FSR4 using the int8 version. On the 6800 XT, I've used the Cyberpunk built-in benchmark. We're going to look at 1440p and 4K, and we're going to look at all three main upscaling presets: performance, balanced, and quality. We can look at the side-by-sides to compare the image quality, like does FSR4 look better side-by-side than FSR3, and how does it compare to native? Although do keep in mind, if you're looking at things like screen tearing specifically, or also just if there's like judder to the camera, because I'm capturing benchmark data, which is out of sync with the 60 FPS YouTube video and capture, that can introduce screen tearing and judder that wouldn't be present. So for smoothness, we've got the frame time graph, and everything looks pretty smooth on there. But for like actual image quality stuff like aliasing and ghosting and stuff like that, that you can use the side-by-side footage for. Now here we can see the relative performance to make sure that FSR4 is faster than native. And how does it compare to FSR3? So let me go ahead and shrink down tiny and out of the way here, and let's go ahead and play the footage. So we're starting out here with FSR performance mode, so native TAA on the left, getting 81 FPS by the end of the built-in benchmark. FSR3 performance mode is getting 122 FPS, but you can see there's a lot of shimmer right now when you look at those arcade machines and things like that. There's just instability. You can see it throughout the benchmark run here. So it's 51% faster than native at 122 FPS, but it certainly does not look as good as native. FSR4, though, like you look at those plants right now, like if you look at FSR4 versus the one in the middle, FSR4 looks a lot closer to the native version than FSR3 does. So there's definitely image quality improvement here in the side-by-side. FSR4 looking close to native, although the palm trees and stuff right now, I think it's still noticeably not as good as native, but still looks a lot better than FSR3. And the FSR4 speed is running at 114 FPS, which is 41% faster than native. So it's not getting quite as big of a performance boost as FSR3, but it certainly looks noticeably better, meaning the more aggressive settings are going to be more usable. Now here we're switching to balanced mode. So the left is still the native TAA. The middle is FSR3 balanced mode. and it's getting 106 FPS, and it still has, issues with the stability, like on those arcade machines right now. I'm seeing some instability, that kind of thing. It's getting 106 frames per second, so it's 31% faster than native. But FSR4 is 25% faster than native. And again, look at the plants right now on screen. It should be very apparent that there's some major image quality benefits to using the FSR4 version compared to the FSR3 version. And again, it's 101 FPS versus 81 at native, 25% faster than native. It's not a 31% boost. But I think the important thing to note here is we could have even used the performance mode and I think still got better image quality than what we're getting from FSR3. So that's important to note. A lot of the image looks as good as native. Some things like the palm tree branches I do think still have more breakup than native. Now, moving to quality upscaling, we still here have native on the far left. Quality mode upscaling FSR3 in the middle, which is getting 93 FPS. Native was 81, so it's 15% faster than native. And then FSR4 on the right is hitting 88 frames per second, which is 9% faster than native. Now, one thing you might notice here is these aren't huge performance boosts, even for FSR3. And as I mentioned in my 7800 XT video, that's just kind of on a game-by-game sort of a basis. Where Cyberpunk at its ultra settings, also a settings mode basis, Cyberpunk at its ultra settings, something about them doesn't scale hugely with resolution the way some other games do. So I've just noticed that quality mode upscaling on the ultra preset doesn't give as big of a performance boost as it does in a lot of other games. So that can kind of just be a game-by-game thing. But we can see here that FSR4 quality is still faster than native and looks better than FSR3 at the quality settings. And really, I would put FSR4's performance mode up against FSR3's quality mode and say that I think in many ways FSR4 performance looks better. Now, here we're switching over to a 4K output. So if you want a 4K display, native TAA ultra settings are only running 35 frames per second. But if we use FSR3 performance mode, we get an 89% performance boost, getting up to 66 frames per second. FSR4 doesn't give us quite as big of a performance boost, but it does give us a 69% boost, which is objectively nice. Now, that gets it to 59 frames per second, so you're not quite locking to 60. So, I mean, in reality, you could tune down some graphics settings on this particular GPU below the Ultra preset, maybe use the High preset instead. But overall, I would say that once again, the FSR performance mode is looking noticeably better with version 4 than version 3. If you're on like a mobile device, not a 4K display, you can like pinch to zoom on like the YouTube app and stuff. But yeah, I do think the FSR4 is still looking noticeably better here and is performant enough. Now, if we go to balanced mode, excuse me, I'm actually getting a little bit of a cold, so I'm trying my best to talk here, guys. Anyway, so in balanced mode, FSR3 is hitting 54 frames per second, which puts it 54% faster than the native resolution. And FSR4 int 8 mode is hitting 49 frames per second. So not as fast as FSR3, but it is still a 40% performance boost over native. And that's pretty noticeable. And again, looking at things like the plants right now, it's objectively a lot more stable in FSR4 than it is in FSR3. So here, again, is the case where I think that FSR4 on the RDNA 2 GPU does make a lot of sense, which is very, very cool. Now, again, not everything's perfect. Like I said, things like the palm tree branches still get more breakup using FSR4 than they do on the native TAA, but they still look very good and I think would be very usable and are better than the FSR3 counterparts. Now, looking at quality mode upscaling, FSR3 is able to get to 45 frames per second, which is a 29% performance boost compared to native, whereas FSR4 is able to hit 42 frames per second, so not quite as fast, but it's still a 20% performance boost over the native resolution at 4K, and so I think, once again, could be worth using. But again, I think the biggest deal here is that I think that FSR4's performance mode could easily stand against and potentially beat the image quality that we're getting from FSR3 quality mode, because things like the, temporal instability, aliasing on the plants and the fence lines and things like that, that's still noticeable on a big 4K screen like I have in front of me. Again, you might be on a smaller or lower res screen. That's still noticeable even with FSR3 quality mode, whereas in FSR4, it's looking pretty good. And like I said, even the performance mode looked pretty good. So I think that's kind of the biggest win here. So that's one of my biggest takeaways is that FSR4, even its int8 version, even on RDNA 2, does seem to be able to be used more aggressively. So I think that even if it doesn't have as much performance as the FSR3 version when running at the same internal rendering resolution, you could use a lower internal rendering resolution than you would with FSR3 and still get similar or even better image quality, in which case you are getting more performance than you were with FSR3, unless you were using FSR3 in its performance mode, which personally I always felt was too much. Like it just loses too much detail, there's too much breakup. So personally, I would have stuck to like the quality mode with FSR3 if I even would use it at all. Whereas FSR4, much more comfortable at 1440p. I think balanced mode looks pretty good. And at 4K, performance mode looks pretty good. And even performance mode you could use in a pinch if you had to on a 1440p output. Now, the other thing I wanted to look at is, so was this more or less performant than what I saw on RDNA 3? So if we switch over to this was my testing on my 7800 XT yesterday. And we can see that, well, the 7800 XT is overall faster in Cyberpunk. I know in a lot of games, the 6800 XT and the 7800 XT don't actually have a lot of separation, but Cyberpunk was one of the games that saw a big benefit from the 7000 series. Anyway, so while we can see that the overall numbers are different, like at the overall performance uplift isn't necessarily better on RDNA 3 than what we were seeing on RDNA 2. Like here at 1440p performance mode upscaling, FSR4 gave a 34% increase in performance over native on the 7800 XT, but on the 6800 XT, it was a 41% improvement over native. So the point is, now really this kind of upscale is probably better measured in frame time than it is in, percentage uplift if we're getting technical. But what I really want to say is that it's not like it runs vastly better on the 7000 series than it does on the 6000 series. Now, I've seen some speculation that if AMD does actually put out an official version of this, they could potentially put out a version for the 7000 series which takes advantage of WMMA, which the 7000 series supports and the 6000 series doesn't. And it's potentially the case that if they did that, then the 7000 series could potentially run it faster, or maybe you'd choose to run it at the same speed but could increase the quality. That's still a question mark. Another question mark that I haven't analyzed yet is, well, it's obvious that this int8 version of FSR4 looks better than FSR3. Does the int8 version of FSR4 look as good as the FP8 version of FSR4 that we've seen on the 9000 series? And my gut feeling to that answer is no, that it doesn't look as good, but it looks enough better than FSR3 that it certainly makes sense to at some point get an official version of this out for AMD. Now, AMD has FSR Redstone coming promised in the second half of this year. So we would expect it, at least before December 31st. Sometimes AMD hits their deadlines on the very last possible day compared to their announcements. But there's been some statements about FSR Redstone being compatible with multiple GPUs, not just AMD's 9000 series. And FSR4 upscaling is part of FSR Redstone. It's just the first part that came out before everything else. So in other words, if I had to guess when we will get an official version of this, that would be my guess, is with the release of FSR Redstone, or at least maybe at that release we would maybe be told that there would be a version coming at some point after that date. So that would be my guess. The fact that AMD has a version of this that clearly works on RDNA 2 and RDNA 3, That clearly looks better than FSR4, even if there can be some issues in some games. I imagine AMD could have continued to improve that. Again, this is probably an old project version, so I do think that this is probably coming officially at some point. I just think that the version that we got here wasn't ready for full release yet. And like I said, my guess would be that FSR Redstone is when it's happening. Now, the last thing I want to mention that some of you have probably already been kind of screaming about here is that you don't have to downgrade your driver necessarily to do this on RDNA 2. I mentioned that earlier in the video, so I'm going to just link you guys to a Reddit thread that has some instructions for how you could instead modify the latest driver, which in this case is 25.9.2, by copying certain files from the old driver that is compatible, 23.9.1, and putting them into 25.9.2. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I didn't show that as my recommended method in this video. One of the main reasons is because you're modifying the driver, it's possible that you could trigger anti-cheat programs. So personally, I wouldn't want to do this as like a blanket thing and I'm just running a driver that could potentially get me banned if I accidentally play some multiplayer game with anti-cheat. Now, some people have said they're using this and they haven't flagged a ban yet, but I'm certainly not going to put my name behind, oh, you won't get banned by this. I'm not going to guarantee that at all. Also, remember with Optiscaler, as I explained in my last video that explained how to do this with Optiscaler, you shouldn't be doing the Optiscaler thing in games that have anti-cheat, because again, you could potentially get a ban. But with Optiscaler, you can use it in the games that don't have anti-cheat. But whereas if you just mod your driver, you could get, it's harder to be selective on what game, and I wouldn't want to be installing a new driver every time I wanted to play a multiplayer game or something like that. So that's my main holdout. Also, there's questions about whether there's any point to doing this, because the advantage of a newer driver is you get specific game optimizations. However, one of the files that you're copying over and swapping, now, I'm not an expert on this, but it was my suspicion, and I did find a comment that's saying the same thing, is that you're essentially just swapping over the entire actual driver anyway, so you would actually lose any of the newer optimizations anyway. This comment is saying, it's worth noting those two little DLLs are only the entire DX12 driver. You're just reverting the DX12 driver to the state it was in 23.9.1, optimizations and all, and again gives the reminder that this could trigger anti-cheat. So, my personal thought, again, I'm not an expert enough on this to 100% with confidence tell you that this statement is true. Because guys, believe it or not everything you read in a Reddit comment is true. I know that could be hard to believe, but oftentimes some people do know what they're talking about, and it is true. I'm just saying I'm not enough of an expert on the drivers to come down one way or the other, but to me, this sounds true. And so there's potentially no reason to bother modding the driver to do this. You might not actually be getting the benefits that you think you would from the newer driver. So that's why I showed the method I did of just downgrading your driver. Now, downgrading the driver has the downsides of you do lose the new game optimizations from new releases, or sometimes newer drivers have bug fixes and things like that. So I think this is really cool, and I think if you play certain games that work well on the older driver, that the visual quality gains of this are worth it, right? And the performance is there. Now, it's also the case that not every game works well with this. I just showed Cyberpunk, where it was working mostly well. I did find a couple of things that looked like some minor issues. So it'll be useful in the comment section if you guys comment games you've tried this in and on what graphics card you tried it on, and how it worked for you. Were there some games that didn't work, some games that are working well? Anyway, let me know what you guys think. And I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting. I will potentially try to do some image quality comparisons in a future video between the Int 8 version and the FP8 version. Can't guarantee when I'll get to that, or, honestly, if some big channel gets to it before me, I might just refer you to that. But it's certainly something that still is worth investigating. But whether this looks worse or not, it at least looks better than FSR4, and it's performant enough to be worth it, even on RDNA 2, and that's good news. I hope all of you have an excellent day.